All right, we are live. Today I have a very special guest. I have Jack Jewell here. Welcome aboard,
Hello.
Jack.
Of
Thank you for making the time. So, Jack, you came
course.
on my radar. I'm not sure how, just through the algorithm, I think. I think I found you on YouTube before
Hmm.
Twitter, and
Okay.
I liked your videos. And I was like, thank God, because I feel like I have to go out of my way to find people who are approaching these issues from a similar perspective, of like
Mm,
being reality based, but also like humanity based and empathy based. And like, I just feel like
sure.
I could tell you're like on the same page. I was like, I need to talk to this person. So yeah, I guess I saw you made your channel about 6 years ago, but it seems like you really started producing content like 8 months ago, which is a similar timeline to me, ironically. But so
Oh,
what
no
what got you
way.
back into it? Yeah.
Well, actually, my YouTube career goes back much further because I think when I was like 15, I was making piano tutorials online,
Oh no
and
way.
then I sort of forgot about it. And then I checked back in a couple of years later, and I had this one for Defying Gravity, and it had 50,000 views, and I was like, oh wow. So
Oh
I've
wow.
since taken those down because that was in about 2008.
Yeah.
I was very into YouTube like since the beginning. It was very much part of my teenagehood, and I'm 29, turning 30 on Sunday actually.
Oh
So
my gosh. It's it's
um,
it's there is life after 30. I'm here to tell you. I'm
I'm
34.
looking forward to it.
So
Looking forward to
I
it.
know, honestly, once I had the little like psych out when I was like turning 30, just because it's like so distinctly like, all right, now you really gotta like get your life together. Like it's cute to be a fuck
Hmm.
up in your 20s, but it really stops being cute in the 30s. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a big milestone.
yeah,
But
definitely
yeah,
getting my shit together now. I suppose can't run away from feeling like a child, even though I swear I always do, at least at heart. But so yeah, back to YouTube. Well, I always really wanted to do it, and I had a couple different ideas, in my 20s, which I tried out and I enjoyed, but for some reason I just wasn't feeling inspired enough, and it didn't really stick.
mhm.
And I didn't want to force myself to do something, but then this came around. I mean, if you told me a year ago that I would be talking about this stuff online, I would just think, what the hell? But
Same. Same.
because of my circumstances and the way my life led me down certain roads and had certain experiences with friendships and everything, um, coming to certain realizations about echo chambers I've been in, views that I've adopted sort of blindly, and also it being so enmeshed with my sexuality.
Mm,
For some reason, I just felt compelled to speak about it,
yeah.
and not only speak about it by putting out a few feelers with friends here or there. It was just like bam, public.
Yeah.
And I think historically as a person I am a bit reckless, which has its pros and
Same.
definitely has its cons. Nice. um and I
Well, there's
think
no risk and no reward, and I found, at least for myself,
yeah.
that it was really rewarding when I started saying things that I was afraid of saying. I started to with people close to me, like, "Am I crazy?" Like, but it kind of seems like maybe this has gone too far. Say, like with trans activism, the sports issue, the prison, take your pick, all those little issues that pop up that are kind of coming down to a core issue of like a lack of shared reality, a lack of shared community, and I just really saw that like fracturing the community apart, and uh, but I had a lot of friends with similar concerns to me, and that
Okay.
made me kind of realize like, okay, I'm not crazy and bigoted, and I just kind of like trusted myself more, did more research, and then once I felt very confident in my views, I decided to go public again, and I started up my channel, which I had stopped doing for a while too. That's the YouTube lives. Just like it's really hard to keep up a channel for years and years. I don't know how people do it, but it's it's
Yeah.
um takes a
Well,
lot of like passion.
it gets a lot easier if you hit it big and then start making enough money to live, I suppose. But yeah, I think since I started, I've actually, for some reason, had constant energy to keep going because I'm always
Mhm.
really excited to talk about the next topic, and I have loads of different videos floating around in my brain, and
Yeah.
I think, oh my god, I'm not going to have time to make all these. But then also sort of following current events as well, because it's good to apply your opinions and everything to stuff that's happening right now, and a lot of these topics are huge right now. They just keep getting bigger.
Mhm.
um but I'm really enjoying it. I'm trying not to, people in my life that kind of say, like, what is this for you? Like, is it, and I'm kind of, I don't know, but I'm open to it becoming something. And otherwise, I've learned a lot from it, I think, just as a
That's a
principle of
really
speaking
good
out.
a good attitude. I feel a lot of similar feelings on that, where it's like lately it has been easy to make content because it's what I want to do. The content makes itself. Like there's just people I'm really excited to talk to, especially when I felt like kind of isolated for a while in my views and like was really judging myself for like doubting the certain like narratives around like LGBTQ spaces or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's been very positive and empowering for me to do the channel. I've had some pushback from friends, but nothing crazy. Like they just like one of them found my channel and was like, "Oh, I saw you like Jordan Peterson now," which isn't true. Like, well, actually, it's true a little bit. I'm a Jordan Peterson apologist more so than I used to think he was like the devil incarnate, which I now realize is like so absurd. But it's just like an example where I was fed opinions by my friends that everything I knew about him was from like other people, and I believe that to
Can
be
I ask
true.
what those were as well? Like what? Because I know a big thing about him was like the misgendering comments, and then some comments about Ellen Page. So is it that stuff, or
Yes, that's why, because that's his whole, because his claim to fame was through like Bill 16 and being anti-trans. So I think once he got that notoriety, and then the fact that he has this army of young men around him, he had all these things that made like people of my social standing, like he had these points against him, like, all right, men love him, that's a red flag, like, or and he's going
God
against
forbid,
those
a
trans
positive male
students.
role model?
I know, but now that I've gone through a lot of being way more open-minded than I was before, to the fact that that's actually a beautiful thing, that if he can help a lot of young men who are profoundly struggling. So that's why I'm just more nuanced and with a lot of my opinions, so, but not everyone is at that level. So did you find like in your friend group you had friction around it, or how was that for you?
So some of that is still unfolding, I would have to say. But I mean, firstly, I'll just say I agree with you. I think the best thing about being, quote unquote, nuanced, even though it's like the word of the year, at least
I
it has
know
been in my
I hate it coming out of my mouth, but it just is the word, it
It is the
describes
word.
it is the word.
I'm not sure how many times I would have said that in my life until a year ago, and now it's just been like nuance. But
I know, because it's almost novel to us when you've been entrenched in a black and white ideology. It's almost novel, like what this nuance thing. What is it?
yeah, for sure. And you're taught to view even someone saying, I'm not sure, or I don't have an opinion on this, you're taught to view that as a threat. And I think if I'm trying to motivate anyone to, reach a point where they can debate things and disagree, even contentious issues like Israel, Palestine, for example, I think, you can always frame it as, oh, well, you shouldn't attack someone because, they're probably coming from a good place. And you make it a lot about the other person. But in actual fact, it's a much happier experience just to be someone that isn't constantly on alert,
Yes,
have
exactly.
this like wall put up and get all fiery. And I think a lot of that also comes from this selfishness that you think, aha, like I've spotted out the injustice and I'm going to shame this person. So that's just a miserable brain to live in. And I did live in that, but I wouldn't say for a very long time. But I think back to your question with, there's been a varying degree in terms of, so I live in the UK, and I feel generally people are more modest here. Well, in terms of views, but also in terms of what they will and won't say to your face. So I've definitely had a few people in my, acquaintances, shall we say, not close friends, who I've kind of not heard a lot from in quite some time. I've had a few other people I know, and they may disagree, but they've sort of not addressed it directly. In some ways, I think that's good, because it's like, okay, the relationship isn't just over. But then the most common response I've got is someone decides to message me, being very disappointed and upset and angered. And the message is just kind of, shame on you. how could you think this is a good idea? And in some ways quite patronizing. Like the last one I got said, you know, I really hope you find inner peace within yourself, because clearly like you're dealing with a lot of trauma, like, or hurt from the queer community. And I just think that's just so patronizing. And I think so the worst one I had, well, there's been a few. I started off with a family member going off on me, and it wasn't necessarily surprising, given, you know, the views I know this person possesses. But that was very difficult because it was right when I just started. And the thing about YouTube is it's a highly rewarding platform, right? But it's the platform that takes the most work, because if you want to make good long form content, that's a lot more work than a TikTok. Do you know what I mean? But now we have YouTube Shorts, which in some ways I love, and in some ways they've been my detriment with these people, because they go on my channel and they'll just click on a couple of those, and then they have 40 seconds of kind of a clip, which sort of puts in the most exciting bits, you know,
exactly,
the most controversial bits to entice someone to watch the full thing. But that's enough for them to go, oh my God, no, I'm going to block this person out. So the short was just me saying, I don't think kids, you know, it was me talking about puberty blockers. It was very like at the very beginning. And my content has changed quite a bit since then. But I was just saying, I don't believe kids should be allowed medically transition. And that was it. And then I was accused of being a transphobe. And when I tried to explain, you know, that I'm concerned about gay kids, and I'm obviously gay, I'm the only gay person in my family. And this person who is now very inclined to what I would call radical leftist ideas and social justice theory, you know, did a master's in gender studies. I was then being told that biological sex is a spectrum, and somehow white supremacy was brought into the argument as well. And it was very, it was just a shocking experience, because I think when I went into it, I was kind of thinking, you know, everyone gets canceled, but like, I'm not going to let that happen to me. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's stupid. Or I guess I wrongly assumed that some people, having known me my whole life, might just go, oh, wait, hang on here. I know that Jack actually, from the 29 years I've known him, is generally someone with good intent. And I do believe that. I think, you know, we've all been through things, but I think most people that know me closely would agree, I hope anyway. But yeah, it was just, it kind of shocked me, and I didn't realize the views were so extreme. And, you know, it's this way of, everything's hypocritical to me, in that some people believe that they're allowed send you, you know, 10 voice notes or 10 paragraphs. And then if you even try and respond, they say, I'm not here to debate. I'm not here to debate you. And that was what I got.
I'm not here to educate you. You don't deserve my labor, my emotional labor to educate you. You know?
Exactly.
And it's like, that's why we have actual, what I think, atrophy of mental functioning in some of these spaces, because it's become so socially acceptable. Like if you can attack someone, and then if they ask for any reasoning, you can just say, oh, it's not my job to educate you. And that's that. And because that's become like a norm, I feel like critical thinking is really, got like, it's atrophied, like a muscle that you don't use, you know, and that's pretty terrifying. But I think there's a way out, and I think people just need to feel like, I think it's really positive, but like people like you are doing, of like coming up and not like being like, all right, now I'm a gender critical, you know, and I hate trans people now, and now I'm gonna be anti-trans, you know. It's like,
Exactly.
no, like you don't have to. A lot of people make that jump if they're drawn to extremism, to go from one side of like the trans activism to the other side of like, you know, full-blown turfdom, you know. And
Completely.
that's why I struggled for a while, because I was like, once I started questioning certain things, what that brought me to was a lot of gender critical spaces. And then I noticed they had their own little weird rules and rigidity, and like the same thing I was seeking to avoid, you know, because I want to be a part of a movement that's all about finding connection and expanding human flourishing for as many people as possible. And I think I've seen hearts and minds change in the way that happens 99% of the time is through commonality and through conversation. And when you really meet someone where they're at, they'll actually come to you really quickly, you know, like if you're willing to take a step in their direction for like the point of a conversation, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, absolutely. And it all depends though on whether, so I mean, we can go into it at some point if you want, but I sort of was further down the gender ideological position. And it all came from an experience I had of wanting to be kind and wanting to be accepted in lots of ways in the circles I was in. And some of these people I'm still good friends with, you know, but I spend in London and in any big city, you know, a lot of these queer circles will be very woke, you know, if you know what I mean. But I learned that I've never been protective over my opinions if I'm shown factual evidence to the contrary. And as soon as I was presented some stuff, I never resisted it. And I'm glad, because I know a lot of people will see something and go, no, 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 no. Like that experience I told you I had with a family member, I said, I appreciate your comments. Like, you know, you have a right to your opinion. I'd really love it if you could watch the full 20-minute video that this clip is from, because I actually talk so much about compassion. I talk about, you know, getting kids the right amount of therapy. And the response was, I'm not going to watch that. So
yes, that's it. I encounter the same, just like blatant, like, no, I will not engage with like that. Just like, it's like you hit a wall, you know?
Yeah. And it's, I think even when people say that and they're making a conscious decision not to do it, they probably still don't fully consciously accept, I am blocking out anything that may challenge my belief, because I know that my belief probably has more to it. Especially if it's around gender ideology, because deep down, everyone knows a man is a man and a woman is a woman. But then it's you know, it's the weeds. It's just made super messy with, you know, with kindness and the politics, LGBT rights, you know, all of this stuff. So I think it's, I'm trying to kind of learn from these situations, because it is really difficult when you try and approach a situation from balance, from trying to see both sides. And I appreciate it so much when someone like you says that to me, because when making content, you can get obviously a lot of people that disagree with you. And I guess I would get it from both sides online as well, like, because I'm in the middle. But it's hard to process people I know personally and I've known for years who sort of now believe that I have hateful views or I'm perhaps of bad character. And then kind of, I've seen them all very easily accuse me of things, but then they don't seem to have any conscience themselves of, I wonder what it's like for him to just kind of suddenly be so heavily judged and not be heard out. But because they believe that their views are the moral ones, then all of that behavior is justified. And that's the exact kind of stuff I'm trying to talk about. So I think I do live with kind of a low level anxiety, like day to day lately, because of these experiences. But, you know, I think with each one, I do grow stronger, and I'm trying to just, I think the interview I did with a psychiatrist who treated gender dysphoric kids, he told me afterwards, he was like, just pity them. And I know that probably sounds mean, but if I see someone unable to engage with the topic at all, then I guess it is easier just to kind of, you know, feel kind of sorry for that situation rather than get super upset. But, you know.
I think you seem like you really have a good head on your shoulders with the whole navigating such a like difficult space. But because it's like, it sounds like you have like, you know, the North Star of like truth and compassion, you know, and I do think that's a good way to deal with like, because we don't want to end up hating the people we disagree with and recreating the same dynamic that we're trying to be against. You know, I don't want a new like nuance versus non-nuance. You know, it's like we have to find some way to actually break what we're doing that's causing so much fracturing and splintering of communities. And that does start with understanding even the people who attack you and understanding that a lot of times these people who are very online, the ones who are messaging us and, you know, just doing the most,
The Twitter
like,
gals.
they are very, very mentally ill. That is apparent as day, that these are people who are suffering, who have latched onto this movement to give them a purpose because they feel like they don't have a purpose in their life. So they're going to defend that with everything they've got once they've like identified with the cause. You know, it's really.
And
So
do you
when
mean
you,
from both sides, or do you
yeah,
mean more the
right
gender?
now I'm thinking more from the trans rights activist side, but absolutely, it
Yeah.
applies to both sides equally. In my, or not, well, I don't. Equally is a hard thing to say because it's like, it's hard to get a good grip on like the temperature when I'm so in the discourse and it might be like a bubble, you know, like it's hard to tell what is actually like to what extent these issues are, you know, because to me a lot of these issues feel really big and real because I came up in leftist spaces, music spaces, creative spaces that are all very hardline, super woke generally, or at least since like, you know, things popped off in the late 20 teens or whatever. But that was already happening in my friend group, you know, years before. I was hanging out with like anarchists and leftists, you know, the people who are like pushing moral boundaries. And I started having friends be non-binary and trans pretty early on. And I always accepted it, you know, and never questioned that really until I didn't start like kind of clearing my mind. I guess it was the pandemic kind of broke me off from like a lot of my social group and like in ways that were like good and bad. Because it was good for me to like be on my own for a while to reflect about what I believe, you know, but it was also bad to be disconnected, you know. So for a while I felt myself getting pulled to gender critical, and I've started reconnecting with the friends and finding like a good balance of like not falling susceptible to that extremism myself. But it's just such a issue in the community. And but I think like the way out is, I think there are people who have doubts and they're not sure. Maybe they're doing independent research, and it's like as they see more and more people have this kind of conversation, it can help make them feel like, okay, this is normal. There's like a format to have a more nuanced conversation, for lack of a better word. You have to find some synonym for nuance or something. Like,
yeah. Well, I think your point about when you're so online thinking, how important actually is this? Like, how much is this affecting daily life? And I think for a lot of people, it's not. Like, for example, I think there are a lot of gender critical feminists who are probably, you know, mothers and have a job and like aren't in LGBT circles. So, or maybe just never come into contact with trans people day to day. Now, I do have compassion for their stance because, you know, you don't have to come in contact with someone who gives you a bad experience until you do, you know. It's like the whole argument of the gender critical side is we're protecting against edge cases. We're not generalizing about all trans people. And that's what we do when we safeguard. We protect kids against, you know, the one in however many men may be a pedophile, but most men are good people. But in my case, I felt empowered to talk about it. And this is something I keep kind of taking a step back and checking myself on, because I think, wait, is this as important as I think? But, you know,
that was another thing. I didn't want to risk losing everything for a non-important issue. I was like, is this the hill I want to die on? Like, I don't know, man. Like, scary.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, I still have questions. I don't really refer to it specifically. I still have questions around my professional life. You know, like I've had no issues in terms of that. But for some reason, whenever I go down that rabbit hole, I always come back to, if I had to just delete my channel, like I would be so upset and I would feel a bit lost. And I'm just not doing that. I think I take a step back, and, you know, I've been through crazy things in my 20s, as from glimpsing on some of your thumbnails and stuff. And I'm looking forward to having you on my channel. I gather you have too.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
of course, absolutely.
If I think about something like that happening, you know, it's not like I'm the next Hitler. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, right.
But I think in terms of how the conversation, has affected my life, I did see the social life I lived in drastically changing just very quickly from kind of 2018 to 2020. And I think a lot of the social justice theory in the UK is behind the US. So, you know, we had kind of largely feminist stuff, Me Too, and then a lot of this trans stuff come up as well. But I didn't even know what non-binary was until 2019. But I know that some people were arguing about non-binary in 2017, like in the States. And I went to musical theater school from my undergrad degree, and that's what I was pursuing for a few years. And musical theater is hyper woke, like it's one of the most woke spaces you can be in. And with all of their DEI hiring, and you know, the casts are just so highly representative minority groups, but then everyone that works in that industry just holds the simultaneous theory that they're all so underprivileged, and you need to question everything you say around them. But I think it goes to show how much things have changed, because I graduated there in 2016, and my whole experience at drama school was just apolitical, you know?
Wow.
And it was fun. I mean, it had its drawbacks, but people would make jokes about race. Like, I always got jokes about me being Irish, like people impersonating my accent. I didn't care. And there were black girls in my year. They would joke about their own race.
Because that's how normal people like actually interact. And that's something that like a lot of people in woke spaces don't understand. Like, if they're so used to that one crowd, like when you're just like, if I'm like hanging out with my coworkers, like people say the most outrageous shit all the time. And you just know that it's all, you know, in good fun. And like, sure, maybe people take things too far sometimes, but it's not doesn't make them a bad person, or like they're, you know, they have some evil intent, you know. That's the other thing. It's just describing this evil intention to everyone you disagree with is so counterproductive, because it's just not reality based either. And I think that's so important, is to be like reality based and like empathy based. I think that's like the path forward. Like, finding some balance between those two things. Like, so I'm curious, with where do you stand now, like on what views do you have in particular do you think have been most like controversial to people, that you find people get triggered by?
So this is something I'd really like your opinion on, actually, because it's something I question, and I'm very perplexed on what the way forward is, because I think the interactions I would have is people. So the first big cancellation I got was that same cohort at drama school. We were due to have a reunion, and they all decided that I wasn't going to come. I'm still very close with two people, but they don't conform to that group think. Like, they're kind of separate like me.
That really hurts, though. It sounds like minor, but like, to feel like you're being shunned from your social group, it's such an insidious insecurity, and like, it's just a really dark feeling. I'm sorry you had to go through that, you know.
No, it's okay. Like, it didn't overly surprise me. And bear in mind, these are people who I wouldn't consider friends anymore. I haven't seen some of them in a few years, but if I saw them, I would probably have a good time, you know, and like a good night out or whatever. But the way they did it was they created a WhatsApp group without me. And then two of them were leading that. And they told everyone he has a TikTok and a YouTube channel, and we feel uncomfortable. We don't want to share the same space with him. I'm not sure if anyone said we feel unsafe. Maybe they probably didn't, but
I can already hear it in my ear. Like, that's so wild. And that's the other thing, these words like unsafe. Like, from what? Your like mild criticism of the excesses of some, like, that's the thing too. It's not like you actually are making content against like trans people, like fuck everyone who transitions, outlaw transition, fuck trans. Like, some people make content like that. You're not. Like, so that's why it's agitating.
Yeah, well,
they're acting like it'd be unsafe. Like, you would create this atmosphere just by your presence of like hate. Like, that's what they're saying about a person, and it's just crazy. It's crazy, really. But I've been a part of many of those WhatsApp groups where people were deciding what to do about someone at a show.
Really?
Who do we allow at our show? Yes, that's why I know how twisted this gets, because I've been a bystander, and that's why I feel compelled to speak more about it, because I never felt really good about the lengths that people were going to. But I knew if I step out instantly, those lengths will be shot back on me. So even if it's not a conscious thing, it's got to be like driving me in some way, you know, like. But
yeah, and you know, this is a group. like I'm trying not to feel strongly towards any individual because I understand what that industry is like and the kind of spaces that they're always in. But this is an industry where everything is about your reputation. You know, I think I don't want to diss it because some people I went to drama school with have been really successful and I wish nothing but the best for them. But I find it a lot less sophisticated than, you know, acting and film and that kind of stuff. It's extremely cliquey. It's extremely bitchy. A lot of the gay guys within musical theater, not all of them, but there is sort of a pattern of always having a performative ego on show, like very fake, very two-faced, and people will easily throw each other under the bus for social capital. And generally what you'll find is the most horrible people and the bitchiest people are the most liked. And so it's the people who will gladly bitch about every one of their friends behind their backs. And the people who created this group, I've seen that firsthand. And the irony of it was I made a YouTube post about it and I said I was cancelled, like this happened. And I said, you know, these are people who for years I saw say nothing but very horrible things about other people that they're supposedly friends with. But I actually never did that. But it's funny how now I'm the person that no one wants to be associated with. And then one guy, so no one contacted me directly. Not anyone said, I want to hear what you have to say, because I think they knew that if they put me in a space in which I was able to defend myself, people may actually see, oh wait, I kind of see your point. But I learned that the girl who created the group has a non-binary brother-in-law or family member, and she took my views as a personal insult. And then the other guy said, I don't want to be in a room with someone who doesn't agree with gender identity ideology. And to me, I'm like, well, good luck to you.
Yeah, good luck out there in the world. Like,
yeah. But so yeah, this is what I'd like your opinion on, because I acknowledged in a video I made about that, saying why I left the left, that a few of my YouTube shorts, I actually took it a bit too far, because with me, I can be quite silly and comedic, right? And I do a section in my podcast where I react to woke TikToks, and lots of LGBT commentators do that, you know? And unfortunately, like, those videos do get more engagement, and people find them both funny and they find them both based. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you're calling out bullshit, and people appreciate that, and a bit of comedy goes with it. Now, they were most offended by that, and this is what I mean by if someone doesn't agree with me or is the type to cancel me, then if they watch a YouTube short, they're even less likely to watch my full video where I lay out a much more complex argument. So that's one side of it. And then it leads me to this. And another friend that called me on the phone took issue with that as well. And she said, you know, you shouldn't be responding to individuals and you're just attacking people. And, you know, there was this one, it just made me laugh. This one girl who made a TikTok saying, you know, your whiteness is the heaviest thing about you. And it was such a hateful video. Like, saying, no matter what you do, your whiteness is
crazy thing to say. Your whiteness is the heaviest thing about you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But
and this person doesn't. I don't think people that hear a white person talk on race, I think it's very uncomfortable for them if they've not heard it before, and pushing back on critical race theory and stuff that Black people say, even that are in that ideology. So I was told, you can't talk about your whiteness. And then my response was, wait, like, I can't talk about my own attribute?
What?
Make any sense? Because my response was just saying, the guy in the video, he was like, whiteness needs to come to an end. And I was saying, you know, like, we have our own, it was just a bit of a sassy video, me saying, you know, we have our own culture, you know, we're not all from the same, like, slave owner line. It's a lot more complicated. And he had a blue beard and purple hair. And then I was like, but you know what could end is blueness. Like,
that's so mild, though. The fact that that's not even that, like, you know, because I understand they're probably, you know, and I actually like Blair White now, but I used to think she was like devil incarnate, as, you know.
Really?
Well, not devil incarnate. I actually have always hate watched her a bit, but like, I thought she was doing harm. I thought she was doing harm to trans people is what I believed. And now I actually kind of believe the opposite. I think she's actually done a lot to create a trans conversation and acceptance in conservative spaces. So that's actually a really useful thing for the trans movement. And then when I actually watched her content, you know, I too was making snap judgments off of like little things she says to be funny and like taking those, you know, in the least charitable way possible, you know, like, so people are going to do that no matter what. But I would say you can't let that like hang you up, as long as you know that when you're making content, like you're like, you can tell when you're acting in hate or like in love and fun and like having positive energy and in the world, like as long as you're not coming from a place of like watching a video and being disgusted or hating this person, you can be disgusted by what they're saying and talk about that. And it sounds like you just, you know, addressed what they said and commented on their hair color, which is, come on, hair color. It's not like an immutable like attribute, you know, like, so you know, I wouldn't be too concerned about that. But I also get, you don't want to alienate people who could. There should be some concern with how you're coming off if you want the goal to reach as many people. So it's a really
and I have been more cognizant of that. Like there was one video that I took down because I sort of, it was someone being misgendered, and then instead of commenting on it and the idea, I kind of did like my own parody of it. So I kind of acknowledged, okay, that was probably a bit too far. And it's easy with these woke TikToks to kind of start viewing these people as like not real, because, you know, if you look at like the pronoun gal or Jeffrey Marsh, it's like these people actually like move through the world and they're like real people. Like what do they, I wonder what a day in the life of the pronoun gal looks like.
I know, I wonder.
Having said that, I think it's just something it's like, is it ethical to respond to woke TikToks because it's quote unquote targeting an individual? Or my argument was, so basically someone said to me, and like, I respect her opinion, she's allowed to have it. But she said, you know, you should be talking about your ideas, but just targeting these whack crazy people like isn't being productive at all. And then my response was, well, the thing is, and you know, a lot of my friends probably wouldn't be very active on TikTok with kind of our age group, but a problem with the younger generation is they get a lot of their ideas from these algorithmic apps, TikTok being the biggest one.
Absolutely. You're actually going to the heart of like where this information is being spread, in my opinion. Like,
agreed.
So much
and I think you can forget when you watch a woke TikTok reaction, you're like, oh, this is just comedy. But I think offering, and I have a TikTok as well, and I'm surprised I've not been banned yet, but I think being able to offer a counter opinion to what these young people are being fed, and it is a downstream effect. I think when I was saying it to her, it sounded too outlandish, right? Because I'm like, okay, well, you have this teacher, there was one about a teacher convincing kids that like they're neither a man nor a woman. And then there are also teenage girls getting non-binary surgeries without nipples. So these ideas come from somewhere. And you may think, why are you going off on this teacher? You know, she's just one kind of whack person who doesn't, you know, probably has a mental illness, doesn't deserve to be commented on. But I think when you use that argument and you realize like the scale of the issues when you have TikTok after TikTok after TikTok. And I think for me, I'm glad you mentioned Blair White, because she was the person that actually made me understand a lot of the things I believed in were complete bullshit. And I was won over to her side almost instantly, because she did it in such a comedic way that I was like, oh yeah, this is totally
comedy
ridiculous.
is good. That highlights truth in a very compelling way. So that does kind of put you in an interesting bind where like it can be a really useful tool to help show people a different way when like just normal communication doesn't. Humor can really highlight the contrast of how unrealistic or how silly something is, you know? So that is a tough
and also
balance.
my argument was, I feel, so LGBT representation publicly in the media, institutions, Stonewall, they're only driving one narrative around gender. Whereas the gay people, of which there are many that are getting tired of how ridiculous, and how many more new flags are there, and like people aren't taking us seriously anymore. Why does pride have to be so sexual? Like, you know, people that are concerned about bringing us back to reality and just wanting to be a gay person but live as anyone, you know, we're not, that narrative isn't allowed to be public. So my other argument is, you have all these people representing me online to the younger generation. So am I not allowed look at what they've said and say, actually, this is what I feel, offer up something else? And then also, it kind of seems like culturally with TikTok, people are much more comfortable, at least I assume, with putting their face online, and then it's sort of fair game for anyone to respond. At least that's what TikTok seems like to me, because you always get people stitching each other, you know?
Yeah, I would say once you are putting, it's not like you're going on someone's private like Facebook and pulling, you know, some obscure thing. You're finding these clips because they're getting views from a lot of people who are fully believing what they're being told. A lot of very young, impressionable kids, you know, like it can be confusing for adults to sift through the amount of information that's being thrown at us. Kids are just so susceptible that it does. That's why another reason why I'm concerned with the affirmation only narrative and system. And that any questioning of any trans identity at any point is always transphobic. And I just know, like, I know myself at this point. I know a lot of trans people, and I know that transphobia just isn't something that exists in my heart, really. Like, I'm sure I have biases like anyone else, but I genuinely love a lot of trans people. And although I do see trans women as biological men, I don't like perceive them as biological men unless, you know, they're behaving in a super biologically male way. Not to sound fucked up, but like I perceive them almost as like their own unique space, you know, and I use my preferred pronouns people use, and it's
so let me ask you a question, because I'd love to dig into this, because you will obviously hear one side say trans women are women, which, you know, doesn't, I think lots of people can disagree, it doesn't make sense. But then you have the hardline gender critical side. I don't even know if you call it hardline, but they would say there's no such thing as living as a woman. Like, what does that mean? You know, that's what they'll say. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm still ironing out a lot of my views on this, which is why I have these conversations, because it helps illuminate my own boundaries. But like, broadly speaking, I do think that we need, from a legal perspective, to keep the legal definition of woman to broadly mean adult human female, because that's the most useful definition for the most amount of people in the most situations. But that's not to say that trans people now don't exist or don't have their own unique obstacles and unique status in society. Because the fact is, like, sometimes I explain like it's like, I'm bisexual, and if I'm attracted to like a trans woman who's, you know, made the effort to appear female, I'm experiencing that attraction in the way that I feel attracted to women in general, because my two attractions feel different. The way I experience my attraction to women and men feels very different, and I approach them very differently. So in a way, I do perceive trans women as like a type of woman, but for legal and in these specific philosophical arguments, it's important to stay in the reality that they are in fact biologically male, because we can't even get to that level of like nuance about like perception, whatever, because we can't get past the reality, the shared reality point, because people can't even say, they think if I say that a trans woman's a biological male, they then draw all these other beliefs out of that, when I'm just trying to describe reality. I do not think at this time we have the technology to change sex. Maybe we will in the future. We probably will if we keep at this. Who knows? You know, with gene editing and shit like that. Like, but as of right now, we cannot meaningfully change sex. And me saying that goes against the kind of mainstream narrative, even though they deny that they say that. It's like, it's confusing, because people will say like, oh, no trans person is saying biological sex doesn't exist. Yet I have this argument all day, every day on Twitter about biological sex existing. So it's like, obviously there is like a substantial amount of people who are confused about the reality of sex itself. And there's a lot of, you know, like studies that are like, yeah, sex is so much more confusing than we thought. And it's just like, there hasn't actually been any new info about sex being confusing. It's just the prevalence of
Oh
critical
God.
gender theory that has come up. Like, we haven't had any
That
new
kills me.
data be like, wow, like there's so many intersex people we didn't know about. And it's like, there are like maybe 1% of people who are intersex, but it's like, it
Yeah,
doesn't make sense
one
for
or
broad
less. And the intersex thing kills me because
it's such a red herring.
it is, and people equip themselves with that in trans debates constantly. And now you have your own, intersex section of the flag with, the yellow and the purple circle. And, there's a nightclub night in London and it has a room. I can't remember what it's called, but they basically put together the acronym because they felt like the night was too cis het male. No, sorry, too cis gay male, like too.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, like a lot of club nights, at least where I am, some of them started as gay men's nights, but now everything is queer. Nothing is allowed be men only.
It's like, that's great. There's queer spaces, but like, I just think everyone should be able to like create spaces how they please without being told they're a bigot, like within reason.
Yeah, as long as they're like, if you're upfront about it. There's another. I keep going in so many rabbit holes here, but there's another. There's a gentlemen's club in London, and it's like mainly very affluent men, like some really famous men are in it. And there's been all these articles in kind of left-leaning newspapers like The Guardian slating it and saying that it shouldn't exist because it's like misogynistic. And it's like, no, like if women want one like that, they can create one.
Yeah. That's the other thing. And women are so guilty of this, broadly speaking, of like, men will make something and we're like, what about it? And it's like, hey, we're free, baby. Yeah, it's not the 40s anymore, baby. We can do whatever the fuck we want, like, get with the program. Go build your own shit, let's do it. Like, enough of the hating and tearing other people down for doing shit. It's so lame.
It's so interesting you say that because so much of these issues, you can trace a lot of them back to people have forgotten that we're mammals and they don't want to acknowledge that there are differences between the sexes, like on average, right?
Yeah, that's a huge component.
I think something Dr. Deborah So, do you know where she is?
I'm familiar with her work like peripherally, but I haven't super dived into it.
I think something she said in her book was, so I mean, psychologically, men are more likely to have narcissistic tendencies, and women are more likely to have neurotic tendencies. So, you think of one side having an ego and the other side having a tendency towards negative mood. Now, when you think of that from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes perfect sense because the female has to be sort of more pessimistic because she needs to look after those kids and make sure, like, you'd rather be overly cautious that kid doesn't fall over or like get eaten by a bear or something than not care. Whereas like men potentially have to go out and fight and, trust their instinct and not be intimidated in scary situations. So sort of have an inflated sense of who they are. And then that leads into this like men wanting to empire build and make these things. But I think Deborah So said, the more a society tries to reach a point of making men and women the exact same, the more women will grow in neuroticism and men will grow in narcissism, right? And I feel like you can sort of see it,
Yeah, for sure. I'm so with you. I do think a huge component we're missing is that like the biological just reality. Like, we are mammals. Look across mammals. You will see a lot of these behaviors and patterns emerging because they're evolutionarily useful, not because they're evil. It's not good or bad. It just is. It just is that men tend to be stronger. It just is that men tend to be overrepresented in geniuses and idiots. These things aren't, and it just is that women tend to be more nurturing and more pro-social and more neurotic in a lot of ways, and more like, we each have our strong points and shortcomings that almost like there isn't a better, worse sex. And this whole conversation is so, the sex wars too is like another obstacle. I'm trying to like, I would so like to like heal the relations between men and women. And a lot of that, in order for us to understand each other, we need to be real about our biological influences and limitations, because that is what is driving everything. We don't exist in a vacuum. We evolved like every other creature on this planet, you know? So I do think that's a really important perspective to understand, like, what's really going on, you know? But people get triggered.
I wonder
you
if
know?
I wonder if it started becoming, so you can trace all these things back, like, you know, the patriarchy to men wanting to empire build, and like, you know, it made sense just from a system point of view that, you know, that women were at home and men went to work or whatever. Not saying that that's right or wrong, or that you shouldn't have personal choice, because I think everyone should, but I think it's like, you know, and it's happening more now with AI and everything, but we got to a point where technology just started exponentially changing. So then you had this massive booming civilization where these evolutionary strategies that we have were not equipped to suddenly have this massive patriarchal system. And then men started believing that women actually can't do things that they can do, and they're not as intelligent. And I just wonder if a lot of those, so when biology starts becoming sexist, I wonder if that is a consequence of how rapidly technology and civilization has expanded. Because when you start referring to differences between the sexes, people view that as sexism, but they're completely different things. Sexism is recognizing a difference, or saying there is a difference, and then treating someone indifferently because of the difference, right?
It's about treating individuals based on broad characteristics of groups, which is never wise, because every individual is different. But like, broadly speaking, I think a lot of women, we almost like hyper internalize the like feminist message, like, and it's like feminism has been like empowering and great for me in some ways, but I also noticed I started to view any natural female thing almost with a negative. It was almost like more sexist, like, oh, if I'm more nurturing, or if I want monogamy instead of like one night stands, or these desires myself, I felt like weren't good, like they're bad, because it was almost like I'm trying to replicate a masculine ideal, even though I say I'm being feminist. It's like I'm not willing to actually step into like being a woman in everything that means, and accepting my biological realities, limitations, and making the best of that, because there's just no progress or anything.
And the reference point is always masculine behavior. So when you try and make the sexes the same, it's always trying to push women to be as career hungry, as promiscuous, like, you know, I mean, I've encountered women personally who I think probably feel pressure to care less about sex. And I think if you're someone who can sleep with someone, and then it's a one night stand, and it's really fun, and it doesn't have any lasting effects on you, I think that's absolutely great. I think the more we can drive personal choice, but the problem is now, you know, the feminist movement sort of made it so, and the inflation made it so you can no longer have a stay-at-home mother, at least in really rare cases, even if she really wants to. So now, but you do have lots of women then, if they do choose to stay home, they have this like inner anxiety of people will view them as this trad wife who has nothing interesting about her, even though deep down that's what she wants to do. But then the experience itself is sort of tainted because of this, you know, fear that people won't see her going after this career, you know?
And that's a really damaging mentality, when as a woman, you only have so many years of fertility. So it almost like bothers me, because it's like, I never had the urge to have kids. But then part of me was like, did I even let myself mentally go to a place to know if I wanted kids? Because I never even thought of it as something that was possible for me. Because I was just like, I was this, you know, punk kid. So I was just anti anything traditional, anything normal. I'm not that. Like, yeah, I just want to be as bad and cool as possible, basically. And that led me to a life of misery and drug addiction. So like, it's really not the way to go. But
yeah, I think lots of people just, you know, it's a prevailing theme in all of it, is people aren't thinking for themselves. So if even if it will get you in with the cool kids to sort of throw away your fertility in conversations and from your mind, then that's what people are doing, you know?
Yeah. I mean, and it's like, It seems like you're on a similar page broadly, and there's so many different like rabbit holes and tangents we could go off of, but I know
Yeah,
it's much
we should
later
probably
where
try and
you
bring it
are.
back to like a central theme.
Yeah,
Hit me.
yeah. So also I don't know what time it is for you, so I don't want to keep you like super late or anything.
I can keep going till whenever.
Okay, sweet. Well, so to kind of like wrap things up, what do you see like as the path forward from here? Or what advice would you give to other people who are maybe questioning their beliefs and not sure what to do?
If you're questioning your beliefs, I think it's probably good to try. I haven't really thought about this. I mean, I think I obviously identify the people in your life you feel safe to open up with.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully you have some of those. And if not, then you need to go out and find some things, like whether you want, like take up a new hobby or try and find a space that's not hyper woke in that sense, because I've learned that if you start changing your views and then you stick in the same circles and you can't say things, I feel very differently in those spaces now. I feel like even though I'm not lying because something might not come up in conversation, I sort of feel like I'm living a lie, and that's not
Exactly
a
how I
nice way to
felt. Yeah.
be.
I actually think
if,
that's excellent advice for, just having not thought about it, as you said, like that about going into other spaces with different kinds of people, because it is a big world with all kinds of people who believe different things. And there's a lot of normal people out there who aren't even thinking about this stuff. And it's probably good to like have an assortment of people in your life and just picking people who care about you and know you. And I think that's something that is missing from the conversation on the woke end of it, is like the idea that you can know someone and know that they're a good person, and that doesn't change the second they say something you disagree with. And I'll use an example that I actually feel kind of ashamed about, because like when I was in those woke spaces, I tended to like, I trusted like what my like queer Black friends were saying. I like was like, they know something I don't, so I really did
yeah,
trust their perception, and I thought that was the best way to go. But I would find myself doing things that I was uncomfortable with, and I thought my discomfort was me just being a white supremacist, but like one thing that happened is like I had a friend who I had known for like a few years, and she had never struck me as a bad person. She was heavily involved in activism and like police reform and Black Lives Matter and doing things like that. And she moved away to like go work on a weed farm. And then I noticed all my friends start unfriending her, and I get a message from a friend I really respect saying, "Hey, just so you know, Kate is a white supremacist, and so we'd appreciate if you unfriended her." And I was like, what? Like, because I would have never guessed it. But I'm thinking like, wow, I didn't know what to think. I was so shocked. And then what I did is I just unfriended her, because I was like, you know what? She already moved away. Like, she probably wouldn't even notice. Like, let me just unfriend her so I don't have to deal with this. And then the girl messages me being like, I expected this from other people. It's like makes me like almost want to cry. But she said she didn't expect it from me. And it was like, that killed
what
me.
was her crime?
I never found out, but I'm sure it was something stupid, like saying like
Having
in my
like
social circle,
1%
I
of
had
BLM that she disagrees with or something.
literally my old band, we had a band meeting because on Facebook our bassist had said that the not all cops are bad, or like not all white people are bad, and that for us was like a band breakup moment. Like that's how entrenched in it I was. So sometimes people act like these things aren't issues. I just know for me in my specific life, they very much were very real and like present in my day-to-day social interactions, because that was my world. But I have noticed since
it's
I've been
amazing how easily people can and it shows that these ideas and the polarization, it doesn't matter how intelligent you are, you can fall privy to it, because that tribalism is stronger than intelligence. And people can easily just adopt an opinion of, oh, all policemen must have had the exact same upbringing and like gone into the police career line for the exact same reason, and like all have these nefarious intentions, which is just so dumb. Like, it's like when you take a step back, you realize, how stupid it is. And I've noticed other people who've had similar experiences to me, they say, oh my God, I feel so embarrassed, or I feel so ashamed of that. And I think that too, encounters I remember and encounters I put on some people, not very many, but some people, you know, where they didn't deserve that. So I was wondering if we should, because I know that the title was kind of the gender critical stuff. Do you have some time to like talk about that, or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sorry. Whenever I do a stream, I'm so like mentally all over the place that I'm usually just like wherever the conversation goes. But yeah, I as of right now, my thoughts on gender critical spaces is I stopped posting on over it. I stopped spending as much time on there, and I've started really making an effort to create, like, especially on like X, I go out of my way to find people who are trying to find that balance, who have similar goals to me, you know, people like you. I'm just trying to hope that we can be our own big enough coalition that we can suck out the reasonable people that are in gender critical spaces, you know, or in super far left spaces, and that we can build a coalition and create a new norm. You know, that's kind of where I'm at with, you know, the gender critical.
I just thought if we did that, we'd probably end up then with some people going, that's not nuance.
I know.
We're canceled.
I know. It's literally going to be unavoidable. But I do think if we create like a norm of like, it's okay to disagree, like just having more like norms like that, I would hope would counteract some of that tribalism. But anytime you try to get a group of people to work, I think some tribalism is going to be unavoidable. But another thing with gender critical we could talk about is like something like I'm still struggling in my understanding of what it really means to be trans, and like sometimes I don't fully know how to counteract certain gender critical ideals quite yet that I find questionable. I'm trying to think of an example, but just like these like really, really, really hard lines around like female spaces. Like I get with like sports and prisons, bathrooms, I just personally don't care that much about, but like it doesn't give me a solution to what to do with the trans individuals, because that doesn't feel good to me either, to put trans women in a male prison. So there's
so with that argument, I've come to the point of thinking I care about trans people and their safeguarding, and I also care about women's. And unfortunately, you know, if you're a trans woman, that is a male issue. Like it's an issue of the male side of the population. So you can't then put that on women to solve that issue for you. You need to tackle it as a male issue. Like you could call it like a little segment of men's rights, or you could just call it a segment of trans rights. So it would be like, as in, I think, imagine if the trans rights activists were going around to institutions lobbying for a third bathroom option, or to sporting facilities lobbying for at least one private, like, small room. That would be so productive. Or what if Stonewall was spending all their money on stuff like that instead of forcing women to change? So,
and honestly, creating an LGBT backlash that I feel, I mean, you know, just especially among conservatives, like it seems more normal to be like, you know what, gay marriage, maybe that was a mistake. Like, it seems like they're ready to throw a lot of these ideas out just because of that. Like, it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed. I think it's just a natural progression, because unfortunately, most gay people I know and I've met, you know, over here would agree more with the trans side, because it is that tribalism and they believe it's the right thing to do. So I think a lot of the GCs will start viewing them as part of the problem. But then there is also an element of the GC side which is like very gay obsessed, because they're always like, but it impacts lesbians, and you know, they kind of are always like, it impacts women and it impacts gay people, which I do agree with. And it impacts them in very different ways. But I'm just of the opinion that if as a society you have medical systems that accommodate people to, in some or a lot of cases, actually pass as the opposite sex while not being that sex, you also need to mandate policies for, like, to accommodate them and having third options, because you can't just like put in a system like that. It would be like, you know, if we had the technology to turn to make adults look like kids.
Mhm.
Whether that's ethical or not is its own debate. But if a society decides that a medical system and medical companies are legally going to be able to do that, then they also need to put provisions in place so that that adult who looks like a child just, find another random woman to pretend to be his mother and then go and enroll him in school.
Yeah.
Like, there needs to be, okay, well, you need to see their birth certificate. And then when you see it, you'll see, okay, this person was born in the 60s. And I think it's the same with trans. And like, I'd be curious to hear your opinion on this, because with the hardline gender criticals, as we say, a lot of them started from the stance of, I don't mind using someone's pronouns, but I want to protect women's spaces, etc. But now a lot of them say you can't use the preferred pronouns because then you lose the meaningful way to discuss sex. And, something Posey Parker, Kelly J. Keane said, if I'm out to dinner with a trans woman and I spend all night referring to her as she, and then she goes to use the women's bathroom, what do I say then? Oh, she can't go in there? Then I've lost my ability to speak meaningfully about sex. But then I've not been able. My view is, if we have biological sex clear as day in legal terms, so any birth certificate, any important legal document that you have to refer to your sex, it's clear. And whenever we write a news article about a trans person who has, done something bad or done something good, we start by saying trans woman or like trans person, so that it is clear. Because while she, her is a pronoun that typically refers to adult human females, it is a pronoun. And I think is it not possible for a pronoun to refer to kind of two different things while still, in my argument to Kelly J. Keane would be, you say to her, you're trans, you shouldn't be going in there. Like, that's it.
Yeah, it's not that. I wonder what because I agree. I'm with you where it seems like a lot of trans activists just want to obliterate any difference between women and trans women, which will never happen because it doesn't make sense, just on a reality level. But I agree. It should kind of be like an asterisk kind of situation where it's known, like, yes, this is a trans woman, not exactly the same as a woman. This is a man who feels more comfortable living and presenting as a female. For me, I feel like with people like Posey Parker, like, they think that this is going to maybe like take over and maybe the point, because there is some but I feel like that affects like young women more, the like contagion aspect. But I think I just don't think a lot, like, it doesn't mess up my safety signals to use female pronouns for a trans woman. And my pronoun policy generally is I refer to people in the way that I think is most useful to refer to them. If I'm referring to Blair White, it's most useful to say she. That's what people will be confused if I say he. So what are we doing now? We're playing a different language game that isn't, it's like.
That's it, because pronouns aren't just about sex, they're also about perception.
It's all about perception, yeah.
I think so. I've watched most of Helen Joyce's podcast, and I love her. But she was talking about Book Angel, and she was kind of arguing that in another world, Book wouldn't have come to the decision that Book was trans, but it, as a result of all these different things. And then she said he. And then she kind of corrected herself, and she was like, "Oh, she." Yeah. And I was like, "See, right there is it's its own like mess." Yeah. I'm very critical of non-binary, and I don't like it, and I don't think it's added any productivity to like the gay, what it means to be gay and like that community. Trans and transitioning and gender dysphoria, I see very differently, and I have a lot more compassion for it, because it all does stem from sexuality in different ways, which we can talk about. But I think I always argue non-binary doesn't work for me, because you see someone and you just automatically in a split second go to be like man or woman. Yeah. And with Book Angel, then my argument doesn't make sense anymore, because if I'm going to refuse to use they, them pronouns, then for Book Angel, I have to consciously concentrate when I refer to Book to say she. And that's what I'm saying I shouldn't have to do. So that's where I'm at. And pronouns for me are like it's a combination of perception and courtesy. So if someone just naturally looks like a woman, it feels incongruent for me just colloquially to refer to her as he, him. And then if a trans person is very disrespectful and bullying, like India Willoughby, I wouldn't personally feel uncomfortable saying he, him. Because for me, it's about courtesy and respect. And if you want to kind of mimic the other sex to treat your own mental health, whether that works or not, then the baseline you need is like complete and utmost respect for that sex.
I think that's exactly my perception on it too. It's like, yeah, it's both. It's a combination of how I genuinely perceive you, what I think is useful, and a courtesy to say, like, I'm meeting you where you're at. I'm here. I'm respecting you. I'm addressing you how you like to be addressed. Like, it's no skin off my back to do that. But I understand the reasoning why people use correct sex pronouns from an ideological perspective, but it is a very ideologically based thing. It's not. That's like.
Yeah, I just want to hear someone. I'd love to ask Helen Joyce this if she came on my podcast, because maybe I'm wrong. Because a lot of them would say once you start using the wrong pronoun, you lose the ability to meaningfully talk. Like you lose the ability to say, that's a man in my changing room. He shouldn't be in there. But then I'm like, but why can't? So it's if I call a trans woman she, her, I would still say to her, you're a biological male. And you shouldn't be in this sport because your sex is male. So I'm just wondering, like, can those two things not exist together? Because they seem to really think that once you let that domino fall, they'll all fall. But I think mainly what's making them fall is legislation and an insane medical system, not just she, her, and he, him pronouns,
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Helen Joyce. I got her book like a few weeks ago because I've been watching a lot of her interviews. And even though I'm not with her on a lot of stuff, she's very articulate and brilliant and fast, and she has a way of wording things that I found interesting. So I got her a book. My main disagreement with her is, and maybe I'm wrong, but like her whole thing is like trans isn't even a thing. She rejects the whole kind of like concept that transition ever benefits someone with gender dysphoria. You know what I mean? And I don't know if that's where I would land on that. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it was actually a topic I had thought of earlier that would be good for us to talk about. I completely agree. I think a lot of these hardline GCs as well. And I respect Helen Joyce so much, and I think I love how she still has compassion, and she doesn't become inflammatory like Kelly J. Keane would. Like personally, I think that if you're someone who's on the fence or doesn't know too much about it, like no offense to Kelly J. Keane, I do also respect her and her views, but you turn on a video of her and you're kind of like, oh God, like this is just not pleasant to watch. Like it's quite grating, and there's no hint of compassion. And if you are someone who just naturally thinks I should be kind to trans people, but you've never considered the implications, then you're not going to listen. And But anyway, where were we? So they've now gone down the rabbit hole and the polarized side of in fact, there's actually there's no indication that any of these interventions benefit anyone. And actually, the outcomes seem to be poorer for people. But then when I've seen interviews of Helen Joyce back when she kind of initially started talking about it, and in her book, I've read it twice, by the way. And it's so weird because I'm literally like midway through my second time reading it.
I'm like midway through like my first time reading it.
It's great. But back when she wrote that, she was still of the stance, I'll use the pronouns that the person wants, right? So it's really weird to read it in her voice and see her referring to like male prisoners as she, her. But when I looked at interviews of her back from when it first came out, like she talked about interviewing, Anne Lawrence, for example, who, do you know who Anne Lawrence is?
She, the famous trans.
So she's an autogynephilic type trans woman.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know exactly.
Who's public about AGP, and started as an essay, but then a book called Men Trapped in Men's Bodies, where
that's
and I've
on
still
my
not read it.
list.
Yeah.
I haven't either, but I want to.
Yeah. So she referred to her and she said, you know, she struggled immensely her whole life. And then when she did finally get the bottom surgery, she was incredible, like a lot happier. But now it seems to me that a lot of them are taking this stance like, oh, this is like with the WPATH files, which I feel were really important. And again, Mia Hughes, who wrote the report, is incredibly intelligent and she did a really good job of writing that report.
Yeah.
But now a lot of those people have seen the horror of the ideology and they've gone, oh my God, this was actually never supposed to happen. Like no one was ever supposed to get this. This is going to go down in history as, you know, it's going to eventually be something that no one does anymore. And we'll look back on it with horror, thinking, oh my God, when they tried to turn men into women and women into men. But I think particularly with the autogynephilic type like autogynephilic type males, it's a sexuality, right? So in my view, when you look at, you know, a male who is attracted to minors, for example, if he spends his, you know, if he's a virtuous one of those people, and I would hope that there are lots of them out there, while it makes me really uncomfortable to think of that, if you're someone who never does anything illegal, including even what, you know, something visual, like I think that must be an absolutely miserable experience, like the amount of self-loathing you must have to deal with. And with male sexuality, it's kind of cemented once it's cemented. And the paraphilias are so much more common in men, and they can, people always talk about how destructive they are for other people, but actually if you're someone who has a paraphilia and you're a good person and you don't act on it, that can be a miserable experience. And for autogynephilia, as Ray Blanchard studied it and understands it, it's a sexual orientation that doesn't change. And for some people, that sexual orientation is so strong that they have an incredible amount of dysphoria. And I don't necessarily believe, from everything I've read and accounts I've read, that just by going to loads of therapy, they'll eventually, it depends how severe it is, right? Because Anne Lawrence talks about how she just desperately wanted her genitals gone, like since adolescence. And she had this like fear of the masculinization of her body. And like she lived back in a time where she didn't have access to get these things, but if she had the internet, she would have found a way to, like, you know, order something to be able to castrate herself, like anesthetic and stuff. And I know you can look at that and think, well, obviously this is someone who's mentally ill, we shouldn't be cutting them off. And I do agree with that to a point, because someone needs lots of therapy to understand what they're going through. But I think when you look at mental illness, and I believe dysphoria and gender dysphoria can lie in that, there are people who have clinical depression their whole lives and never get to a place where it's managed well, and they struggle their whole lives. Same with people who have schizophrenia. They may find a medication that helps them a bit, but some of them will struggle their entire lives, like in and out of institutions, like not able to participate in society. So with gender dysphoria, even with antidepressants and with lots of therapy to understand, okay, I have AGP or whatever, I still think there will be edge cases of people who are destined to be miserable. And I don't want that to be the case. So I think, but the problem is I'm not qualified to say so, because there needs to be good literature. And I agree with that.
I think a huge issue is that we just don't have that good data to go off of. And, you know, groups like WPATH that were supposedly doing all this research and like coming up with these guidelines have been proved to be a total sham, you know? So it's the whole house of cards falling.
I feel worried because with WPATH, like, it's a mixed feeling that I have, because on one hand, I'm like, yes, we got him. Like those bastards, like sterilizing kids. And that's what gets me back, my back up the most, is all the gay kids who've been harmed. But then on the other hand, I think of trans people who have done it and are happy. Their lives may not be perfect, but it's improved their lives. And they've accepted that taking cross-sex hormones has its risks and whatever, which I believe they should be entitled to do. So I really worry how this is going to affect them. And I think it's similar to, you know, how Like if you take a trans person who like rapes someone and then, or a detransitioner, and then trans people will say, oh, but they were never really trans. Like gender critical people will take the same approach with, well, what about Buck Angel? What about Blair White? What about all these people who seem to be thriving and have like incredible careers? And they'll say, oh, well, it was just a placebo, you know, like they could have just dealt with it otherwise. And who knows? But
yeah, even if it is, like they're alive, they're doing okay, you know, like
exactly. And sometimes there's more than one way to solve a problem. Then yeah, with people like Blair, who maybe in another world would have been a gay man, I think I would think a lot of those actually could end up not transitioning, because a lot of them have dealt with trauma, sexual abuse, and intense homophobia. And I think it's easier to pick those things apart than with an AGP person. You know, you're sort of saying, this is your sexual orientation, get used to it. You know, you can't remove that. Whereas you can remove internalized homophobia, and a lot of them are on the autism spectrum. And so they have that black and white thinking, you know? So I think with better care, you would see probably less gay people transition, and still maybe a very small subset need it. But then you'd probably still see a lot of those males who will be miserable, you know?
Yeah.
That would be my guess.
No, I think you made some really good points. And like, I too, like a big concern of mine is for like LGBT kids, who are often, you know, at least from literature I've seen, it's very common to have like gender nonconformity or even experience full-on gender dysphoria that'll go away as you hit puberty, and then you realize your sexuality, and then you can build an identity from there. And that's why I was so concerned about puberty blockers, because if the child can never experience that puberty, how can they know what is what, you know? That makes it
you're removing the mechanism by which treats the dysphoria. And all the literature before suggested that watchful waiting was the best approach. But then in the Netherlands, they just saw a problem of, oh, look, we have some men who transition and they're really unhappy because they don't pass. And that was such a big assumption to make anyway, because they just said, oh, these people are depressed because they don't pass. Like, whereas there could be many, many factors of why they're depressed. And that was what led them to the experiment of, let's take some severely dysphoric kids and block their puberty so that they can pass. Wow. But in their study, which was absolutely terrible anyway, they only accepted kids who were mentally completely sound without their dysphoria. So they didn't, if they had any comorbidities, they were out. Whereas then every other medical institution was like, oh, I'm going to take this study that's inconclusive and then apply it to like anorexic girls and, you know, all the autistic kids and all the kids with bipolar disorder.
So many like, at least like I spend a decent amount of time like on TikTok, so I'm seeing what the young kids are seeing, and it is a lot. Like I see a lot of comorbidities. It's like every trans person on TikTok also has 8 mental illnesses alongside with it, and especially the autism, which, like you said, it causes the black and white thinking, so it makes it hard to really comprehend that you can still do all the girl things and be a boy. And like, that's so like tough.
There's some trans people I watch on YouTube who I really like, and they've transitioned a little bit later, but they would be the kind of gay type, if you know what I mean. But when they share photos of their boy self, they're like very masculine presenting, and then I kind of think, would you like what would have been like if you tried having long hair and nails and like, you know, would that have changed anything? But I don't know, like, I think some people like to brush it off and say, oh, well, if you're a man, then you can just do all those things. But I think if you're famous and you're someone like David Bowie, then people don't give a shit. You can go outside wearing like a bin bag and people will think it's fashion. But in reality, even in liberal society in the West, if I go out tomorrow, well, actually in London, it wouldn't be too bad. But if I go out in another part of England and I wear like a dress and heels, I don't necessarily think it's going to be very, very comfortable for me, you know?
No, so it might not even be literally safe, you know? depending,
so
because
I
I've seen.
do understand how some of them still come to that conclusion of, it's kind of like, I'm going to go the whole way or not at all. Do you know what I mean? Because if they have
Yeah.
like breasts and they have estrogen in their system, then they can do all those things and not fear, if they're kind of passing, they can then not fear the homophobic impression. So it's such a complicated issue. And I think the gender critical feminists, most of which are heterosexual, it's very easy for them to say, if you're a man, just do it. Just like wear loads of makeup. But in reality, it's like that lacks understanding of the gay experience, I think,
Oh, and also on the gender critical side is a lack of understanding and empathy towards male sexuality, period. There's a lot of revulsion and squeamishness around male sexuality, and for understandable reasons, because a lot of people end up in those communities because they've been assaulted. And I understand why people can get have that perception, but there's almost like a delusion that a lack of understanding that the way men experience sexuality is different for women. It's easier for women to be the moral sexual, the moral, oh, look at us, we're not the perverts, we're not doing this and that, because we have much lower testosterone, honestly. So it's it's a lot easier. So I think there's a lack of empathy there too, just about.
Yeah, but it's funny because men can be very forthright in that way, but then, women can be really sneaky in terms of getting what they want and getting their partner, and the kind of things that they'll do behind each other's backs to be competitive and compete for the best mate. It's just like we said earlier, both sexes are equally flawed and equally great. And it's about having them work in a synergy. And for me, and, I guess kind of partly you in your case, I recognize that I'm sort of like an outlier of that because I'm not attracted to women. So I do agree. I think the way that they speak about teenage boys, for example, and porn, it does upset me because a lot of boys growing up now are being told this narrative at school that they're toxic and that any sign of masculinity and any sign of them wanting to adopt masculine values is creepy. And then they have no confidence. They're not told good masculine values. And then, they turn to porn, obviously, because teenage boys, people make jokes about oh, teenage boys have erections and wet dreams, and but while having a period for a girl and developing breasts is really difficult, and I can never pretend to understand that fully. Suddenly having a really high sex drive is also very difficult and confusing, especially if you grow up in certain conservative households, or now a society that's telling you if you chat up a girl, you're creepy, you're a creep. You can only approach women online. So the way they demonize, and I keep talking about this with, because I feel like there's naturally more compassionate towards the men who are attracted to men that transition. I keep talking about how raising awareness about AGP and understanding can help us tackle the future AGPs. And I say this could be your son. What would you do if your son was 14 years old and was totally distraught, full of shame, hated himself, thought he was disgusting because he has these fantasies of being a woman, and has no one to turn to but Reddit of these people who then turn him into a narcissist? And anytime I say that to a feminist, she just, or not a feminist, but one of these people, I entered a debate on TikTok and said this, and they burned me alive.
The people aren't ready for the being empathetic to AGP. I've discovered myself, because I approach it from a standpoint of curiosity and wanting to understand, and also not thinking anyone should be ashamed of things they feel naturally, because they can't help it. And I think it's so important to have something on the internet for people who, because I know what it's like to struggle and go through things, and you do rely on the internet to seek support, find out, is this normal? That's half the internet is people just Googling, is this normal? So I think people like Phil and Gray are doing such great, important work, and they get so much shit from everyone, and it pisses me off. They're so wildly misunderstood when I think they're
Phil.
I think they're pioneers in creating a space of understanding for this very misunderstood condition that people live with, and people, the way that the narrative right now is that it's a conspiracy theory, and then among gender critical feminists, it's like this evil fetish boogeyman, the evil AGP, like, you know, and it's neither of those really reflect the full, you know, multi-layered reality. Like, yes, there are people who do bad things who are AGP, but, you know, that'll happen under any group of people, you know, like.
Yeah, and you only see, like, I always say I don't condone bad behavior, and if it's someone who does something horrible, or if you're someone like India Willoughby, or you're like the GameStop man being like, it's ma'am, then I have no problem calling you he, him, because you're not respecting women. But while narcissism is correlated with AGP, and I think the obvious, like from what I've read, the very clear reasons for that is because boys have to go through adolescence with intense shame and revulsion towards themselves, and can't talk to anyone about it. So that ends up building your own world where, you know, you live in your own reality, which is kind of the concept of narcissism, I guess. So my argument is, like, if we can help these younger people, then you will probably have people that suffer with this who actually are respectful, and lots of them may actually have it more mildly, and they don't get like radicalized by Reddit and porn.
Exactly.
And, you know, they hear that and they think, oh my God, like they kind of see it as like you're sympathizing with like a pedo, basically. And that's not, that's no, that's totally not the case. It's like they lose the humanity. And for someone to go through such extremes of like getting bottom surgery and stuff, like you must be, whatever the cause, like you must be in a really, really bad place. You know what I mean?
Exactly. That only makes sense, that it's a profound level of suffering. And that's why in my, you know, approach to this has some like kind of like harm reduction elements of like, you know, I think it's okay. Maybe there's someone who struggles and they think it's best for them to be trans right now and they transition. And maybe that is what helps them get by for however long. And then they can realize that they're not that and detransition. That should be okay too. It's like, you never know what is the reason someone's not going to kill themselves. So I like for people to have as many tools in the tool bucket as possible, but while still doing like moderate safeguarding. And like, I don't think anyone should be getting extreme medical interventions without massive therapy and analysis beforehand, you know, especially.
And also just like setting themselves up to be realistic. You know, I think when Blanchard started this and he wanted to see, I think it was, I might be confusing two scientists here, but to, you know, initially the kind of AGP type trans women were largely turned down because when they started this, they thought, okay, we're only going to transition men we think are a good candidate to pass because one, it will be more comfortable for society, and two, they'll probably be able to be more comfortable with themselves. And they kind of have a point, because if someone is like Phil Illy said, 6'4", you know, your dysphoria will probably only get worse because you're sort of reaching for the woman, but the more you reach, the more you feel like it's running away from you. So I think, like, even if that's, I'm not saying that that's how they decide, but through therapy, really setting someone up to be realistic, saying you can do this, but this does not mean everyone in society will view you as you want to view yourself. This does not mean you get access to certain spaces. People may not use the pronoun you want. There are still people out there who have nefarious intentions for trans people, although I don't think that's a high percentage of people. And it's, you know, you deal with being on drugs your whole life, and, you know, there's just so much, like, there's such a cost that people really have to know, is it easier for me to manage my dysphoria, or is it so bad that I can accept all those cons? And they need to be in a good mental state to make the decision. So,
and it's a very personal choice, and people shouldn't be trying to influence them in any which way, you know. But unfortunately,
that's
like,
all we have. It's just all ideology, you know. Like, Reddit is a scary place. Like, I don't know if you've browsed it or if you've seen.
Oh yeah, I'm on all the main trans Reddits, and I kind of got back more into it because I saw what Ray was posting about how just repeatedly it's just anyone questioning. You see this hard push, this hug boxing, there's this huge influence that's pushing them in one direction, and And that's really scary when it's a direction that comes with so many serious downsides, which are simultaneously being suppressed by, whoever, I was going to say like the mainstream media. I don't know who it is that's not giving the full picture, because I haven't even tried watching mainstream media in so long. I don't even know what they talk about anymore. I don't really care. Like, it's almost not even relevant, but like,
yeah, podcasts on YouTube are a better source of information.
Seriously. Yeah. Because I mean, the news isn't really covering anything interesting, or, they're not going to go near anything that would upset like activists, because they've been really good at rallying together and organizing boycotts. But you are seeing the backlash to that with like the Bud Light boycotts and people kind of putting their foot down. So what a freaking mess, man. What a
I know.
mess.
I really wonder like where we're heading, because
I think the end of civilization is soon. So like, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah. I do think when you really think about the exponential rate of technological growth, it like the point of history that we're at right now is like actually incomprehensible in how extreme the conditions are that we are as a species being forced to reckon with these really powerful things. We have the internet. It's changed how we interact, and then I just feel like there's a million different forces that are all pushing us to collapse in many different ways. I've heard it described as like the metacrisis. I've been watching this guy. I forget his name is like Daniel Schmechtenberger or something, but he had some like pretty good ideas about how like so much of the issues we face in society is due to like bad incentives. We need to align our incentives with a higher cause somehow, because there's just too many strong forces that are seemingly unstoppable. Like if you look at like climate change or things like that, which I've gone back and forth on how I even feel about that, because I don't know what to believe about anything.
It's hard to know what to believe, but
because
then
now that I'm like, yeah, since I've been misled before, now I'm like hyper vigilant. Like I'm much more cautious to like definitively say like global warming is going to kill us, but like pollution, like the things that we're doing to the planet, global warming, just forget about that. Just plastic in the fucking ocean, overfishing, the killing of species, these things like that. And then just the fact that we have to constantly be growing as an economy. And at a certain point, there is like a boundary we can't, there's just a lot of different.
Yeah, I really hope that.
I try to be hopeful and optimistic, but there is a part of me that thinks all those like people who guessed that 2040 is when civilization will end as we know it. I kind of think that might happen. So
what does that actually mean, like civilization ending?
It would mean that the way that we organize society and the lifestyle and level of comforts that we're used to would no longer exist as we know. So I'm not saying like humanity is going to like, disappear, but I think things will be so profoundly different than they are right now due to forces outside of our control. That I think it would be correct to say that civilization as we know it would no longer exist.
I would I guess the optimist in me would say,
bring it. Give me any optimism, because I need it.
Well, I would hope as a species that are designed to survive, like there'd be some sort of survival instinct and, a movement that says just because we can do a certain thing technologically, it doesn't mean we should. And then I don't know. I think there's a lot of things that could be possible to be done in the future that shouldn't ever be done. And I also wonder that if we're basically raising, a future generation to be like brain dead, just dopamine addicted people that have no attention span, and then we realize like, oh wait, I mean, there might be, for example, like outliers of that generation that realize, oh, the way all of our generation's been raised has led them to just being brain dead. And then it's like, how can we put safeguards in place for like, future kids to like, raise them differently? I don't know. I mean, I would just hope that like survival instinct would sort of stop things getting to a certain point. But I do have that underlying kind of fear and anxiety sometimes more now than I used to, I suppose.
I try not to let it like psych me out. Like I'm still going to like be optimistic, and I feel very like I have a lot of gratitude and hope in my life. So it's not something that let stop me or slow me down, but just it is something like, for example, with the advance of like 3D printing, or the fact that with AI you can easily like any bad actor can get access to like bioweapons, or like can easily manipulate, you know, a video to make a leader declare war. And there's so many very like it just takes one thing to like set off like a nuclear meltdown that
Yeah, it's
I just think
probably
there's just too
a
many
really
factors. Like,
it was probably a really stupid like optimism for me to have, because even if in Western society, of which we have better values, you know, governments could say, oh wait, so we have this AI, but we're not going to do this because it's going to cause loads of issues. We're always going to have China and Russia and these places
exactly.
who don't care, and they will do all those things, and then we have to keep up with that, because otherwise
That's
they're a
the
massive
issue.
throat. So
That's
it's always
exactly
going
the
to be that like
mechanism that has to
merry-go-round.
change. It's this
Yeah.
like this fact that if we don't do it, someone else is doing it, and that operating on a world stage, and not just state actors, but just like individuals or like terrorist groups. I mean, I try not to get too bogged down
And it
because
was
there's
like
not
that
much
with,
I
you know,
can
like
do.
the atomic bomb and like all those, you know.
And we've only had that technology for just like such a small amount of time in the grand scheme of things, that it's like I just think that humanity needs to have a big reckoning. And I hope that, and what I kind of feel, honestly, I do kind of feel like there's been a shift in people's consciousness lately, at least people I interact with, where people seem more willing to have difficult conversations, or seeming more empathetic. And, or maybe it's just I'm getting the energy I'm putting out towards people is just coming, you
That's
know.
it. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's working for me, because
Yeah.
while I feel sad about some people that I feel like may drift now, or some people who actually cut me out, then at least the people I'm kind of having around more now are just people I can be real with, you know? And
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so valuable.
Mm.
Like to be, and that was something I was missing when my main community, I felt like I had to always be watching what I said, or like even
It's
observing my
awful.
own mind, you know, like I don't know. I feel like it put me in a
No, I know
weird
exactly what
mental
you mean though,
space.
because that
Yeah.
way of thinking, like when I would interact with a black person when I was like 22, I didn't think anything of it.
Mhm.
But actually, what I felt more was a curiosity to understand their culture more.
Yeah.
But what that community taught me to do was, when I was around a black person, I felt like if I had a subconscious thought, like, oh, they look this way or whatever, I was like, is that my like deep down like
Mm.
embedded racism? And then I think about it, like I grew up in the west of Ireland, where there were no black people. Like there was, I can probably count on one hand like who was black in my town where I grew up. So how am I a white
Yeah.
supremacist then? Because I wasn't even growing up with like viewing myself differently to them, because they weren't even
Yeah.
there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
So
it's like it's good to be like vigilant about not having biases, but it can reach such a point that you're no longer being honest. And I think if you actually view someone as an equal and as a human that you respect, you will give them the truth. You will be real with them. You'll tell them, you'll interact with them in a genuine way, and without filtering yourself through with this huge fear of like seeming racist every 2 seconds. Because all that does is create a space in between you where you're not being authentic together. Um, and generally, as long as you're tactful in how you speak and present things, people, you know, at least one-on-one can be receptive. It's very different
yeah, that's
online.
something I can get better with, because I don't mean that I get heated. It's more that I'm so blunt and so direct that
Mm.
like if I have a thought, I will just come out and say it. And like my boyfriend would definitely attest to this. So I can kind of imagine myself being in a scenario where even a black person is like, "Oh my God, that's cultural appropriation." And like
Uh-huh.
my response to that would be like, "I think that's bullshit." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But to say
But
that
and you
to
should be allowed to have that, if that, because that's the thing is like when people tell us not to say so, they're asking us to lie. They're saying hide what you believe and say this instead. I don't want to do that. That's what, like what you're saying earlier about how even if you weren't saying anything, it felt like you were living a lie. Like I kind of felt that
and
too the more I learned.
in theory, it's really appealing to me to like speak my mind, but you know, even last week, I was just on a night out with kind of a newer friend who he doesn't even know that I do this stuff, at least yet. I don't think so, but there were a lot of topics that came up that night. Like most conversations that came up that night, I was like, oh, you know, we were with two other people, so many political things and like loads of, you know, I kind of was putting my feelers out there. And like, I even went so far as to say, like, I don't even know what queer means anymore. But it was
How did
really
that
uncomfortable.
go? Oh no.
It was uncomfortable. And I felt, you know, naturally I care a lot, you know, the little boy in me cares a lot about people think, even though I've worked so hard on that. But it's one thing to be like, I'm going to just speak my truth and like freedom of speech. And then when you're in a scenario that actually can become really uncomfortable, and make you feel like people really are looking at you like, wow, you're horrible. Like, you know, that it's another thing. But then I kind of went away from that night out thinking like, I wonder if this is actually a friendship I need to kind of pursue more. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's the healthy way to do it, instead of being like, oh, what's wrong with me that I felt weird? It's like, no, I know myself and I felt uncomfortable. I'll pursue different friendships and that's okay. You know, like if you misalign with someone, or if they're in like just such a different headspace that you feel like you can't authentically connect, why would you waste your time? Like I used to have a much broader friend group just from like playing music, like around New England or whatever. And like over the years it's shrunken down, but I've like such more quality friendships with like people who I know I can just like really be myself in. I can tell them any fucked up thought I have and they can help me talk through it. And that people need that. If you don't have that, you can get really lost in the world, like deeply.
I totally agree. And it's weird because my kind of closest friend, both of us went on this journey kind of simultaneously, and we're both kind of from the same kind of group, or like, you know, groups of groups. So that's just been such a relief, because
I had the same thing. We're lucky for that, because my best friend happened, well, she was never super political, but we were both kind of like having these similar opinions, being like, what do we, and at first we were just like, are we just like terrible people? Like, I mean, what is going on? Like, we're actually evil. Okay. Like,
completely. It's so funny. It's like, it's almost like back in a time when being gay was a secret. It's like, oh my, it's like, are you saying that I think, are you non-woke? Oh my God, me too.
You have to like kind of put out, like the way I find out like where people are at is all, you know, there's little like feeler statements or questions, or, you know,
sometimes even noticing how little someone talks. And like I've been with my partner for 4.5 years, and we're just such different people, because he's always been a realist and he's never gone down this, but like he kind of recognized that when I was going down it, it was like a coping mechanism to do with like me wanting to be included with, you know, it's a whole separate story, but I felt friends were slipping away from me, and they were all going into this very queer kind of space. And, you know, I'll always just appreciate so much. I say to him now, like, how the hell did you cope? And I wasn't like, don't get me wrong, I wasn't some crazy like communist. And I kind of learned quickly, oh, there's certain things that my boyfriend doesn't really get. And like, we wouldn't actually really talk about it that often. It was never, I never was like, oh, I shouldn't be with this person because like, you know, he doesn't think his queerness is like his whole identity. But yeah, I just say like, I really respect you being able to just see the person behind that, because I'm not sure how capable I would be. Like, as in, if you had to like turn my boyfriend now like really woke, like, you know, because I'm so outspoken and he's so tolerant and kind of doesn't hold on to things and can easily just hear something he thinks is crazy and just forget it. Like, I can't do that. I'm like,
I know, I'm so stubborn. I'm stubborn, and I've always, since I was little, my mom was like, you should be a lawyer because I will argue anything. And I used to be just very militant, all about being correct. Like I was very much like I got a kick out of it, you know? And it's like, it wasn't leading to productive conversations at all. It was just like alienating my relatives at dinner. So
yeah, and it's dangerous. Like I think J.K. Rowling said, there's a quote from her, and it's like, it's when you're arguing a point and you get a surge of adrenaline, and a feeling like you're like, yes, I got him. Like I'm good. I'm moral.
Yeah.
That's when you should be questioning yourself the most. So I think for me, if I now get like, I mean, this might sound like totally egotistical, but sometimes, like, you know, if you hear a song and a lyric, the way they sing something gives you chills.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like sometimes if I'm arguing a point and I just happen to put a sentence together in what for me feels like the words land in the right place and the facts are embedded really well, like the statistics, and it's like just a very base comment that just obliterates someone.
It's a nice feeling.
I will sometimes get a chill. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm like, that was factual, but it was also just like off you. Do you know what I mean?
Dude,
and I
know exactly what you mean, because I mean, I don't know if I've given myself chills, but I just get I feel like I just feel really good when I'm able to articulate something and just put out that banger sentence, you know, like that compact, got the point across, addressed multiple points, and I'm like, yeah, bitch, boom, like slam dunk, you know?
Yeah, and I think there's a place for it. I mean, I think if you're in a debate and there's like a few little points in which you have that flourish, it's fine, it's entertaining. But I think obviously the best way to approach those things is from a place of neutrality. So wanting to argue your points, but I mean, I always try and tell myself I should be ready to abandon one of my points and one of my beliefs at the drop of a hat, because I want to be open to being presented counter facts to what I believe, and then just being able to be like, okay, well, that's reality, so like, bye, you know, and not having that personal, like, this is why people just like are so scared to even, like, I bet there's loads of trans people or trans activists who've seen that WPATH files like pop up on Twitter. They're probably terrified to click on that. You know, there's no way they're going reading those files, because it's, in a way, I kind of empathize. Like, some people are not in a place in their life where they can afford to have their whole worldview and their whole friend group fall apart, because that, in some people's cases, that is what will happen. So it's like, you can sort of understand why, even though they know, they'll choose to stay in the echo chamber, because it's like, otherwise they feel so, it's like, what would be worse for them? It's kind of like when you think of, you know, some cultures are so, like, you know, for example, I am atheist, like secular, but if you grow up like Muslim, then talking about personal boundaries is like not the same thing. You can't tell your family like, no, I'm not coming to dinner tonight, or like, I'm not going to like our grandmother's house, whatever, because a lot of different cultures will view them things as more important than your own boundaries, you know? So
I think that's a really important point, that like, because I've thought that before, like maybe like 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been at a point where I was truly willing to lose stuff, you know, in order to change my ideology, because I just wasn't secure in who I was at all to stand on my own 2 feet. I needed that community, you know, and that served its purpose. It helped me find myself in a lot of ways. And, you know, I'm saying a lot of negative about LGBT spaces and music scene, a lot of positive too, obviously. But these are just, you know, the negatives I've encountered. But I do try to keep that in mind too, that not everyone, like, they just literally aren't able to turn their whole world upside down right now. Like, for whatever reason, life is fucking hard. People are dealing with a bunch of hard shit all day, like, relentlessly.
Yeah.
Like,
and while wokeness like is miserable for some people, they may be more miserable if they were to abandon it, like right now.
True.
It's such a tricky thing, because it will set you free. You know what I mean?
You're like me. It's like the never-ending empathy trap, where it's like, I can understand each side and empathize with each side. So I just go back and forth of like understanding, like, oh, but it's like, I think that's kind of just
that's a human experience. You know what I mean?
There's multiple like truths and experiences that people, not like multiple like objective truths, but there's multiple ways of being that people are going through, and you just really don't know where someone's at, you know, like, or if they're at a point where they can lose everything, you know?
And it's like you said, I have so many great memories from the LGBT world, and I still go to like club nights and stuff
Yeah, me
where
too.
loads of people wouldn't know I speak about things. But it's kind of like, how do I manage the cognitive dissonance of, well, there's loads of things I do love, even though I have all these issues. But the problem is, if I were to speak on one of these issues, I would lose all the things I love. And then I'm like, are
Yeah.
those things I love like real, or
Mhm.
because they're conditional? Do you know what I mean? But then I hate the idea of like being a gay man, like not being able to, because connecting with other gay people, mainly gay people, like I don't know that many transsexuals, but that has been incredibly valuable to my life. Do you know what I mean? And helping me understand myself and feeling understood. So I don't want to lose that, but I also don't want these crazy ideas to ruin the community. It's like being the black sheep is just so hard.
That's why we have to find each other and rally up and literally force the conversation to improve. Like, I think you have a really, I mean, maybe just because I agree with it, but I think you really have the right idea, and I think you're coming at this from the right angle. So just keep doing what you're doing and examining things how you're examining them, and I think that'll be your key to success, as you have a good it seems like you have a good idea of a purpose and a goal, and of your even an awareness of your own limitations, and you know you can go so far with that. Like, most people don't have those attributes, so it's, you know, it's a great quality. But we should probably start.
I really appreciate that, and
I mean it. I totally mean it.
Same to you. And I do, while some of my content might be a bit comedic and stuff like that, and I enjoy that, I just I need to always remember, like, I'd rather have slow growth and good values than because you see people go through a demise online of just chasing the clicks, and before they know it, they're like, I don't even believe the things I'm saying.
That's a scary thing to happen, and wonder, like, would I even know it was happening? Because there's you can try to be self-aware, but at a certain point, who knows what's driving this machine right now? I don't fucking know. Like, I'm just along for the ride. Man.
Yeah, like you're never fully in control, right? You can try to be, but
yeah,
that is, you know, there's so many philosophical points we've touched on tonight, but it is just like, it's just the human experience, you know, just like all of this insane shit. And it's just like, on a final point, it's like all of this gender stuff is a consequence of, a big of it is a consequence of secular society and people not having a faith. And I'm kind of like, ew, no, I don't want to be religious, but I can understand why abandoning those ideals has also really been detrimental. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I could go on a whole religion tangent too, but I mean, I could probably talk to you for eternity, honestly, because it seems like we have a lot of.
No, well, I'm going to have you on. Obviously, going to have you on my podcast.
Oh yes, next week. So everyone, make sure to tune in. And where can people find you, Jack Jewell? Just Jack Jewell on YouTube, right? Or is it Jack X Jewell? I think. Or
my Jack Jewell was taken. So thank you very much, whoever you are. And Jack underscore Jewell is taken, bitch. So I went for Jack X Jewell. But if I'm the only like active Jack Jewell. So if you search Jack Jewell, then it's just me that comes up. So it's Jack X Jewell, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. So same handle everywhere. Whatever platform you want, I'm on, bitch. But there are actually lots more platforms I don't go on. So
I was just gonna say, you didn't say Twitch. I've been like thinking of experimenting with Twitch since I've
never been on Twitch. I've never been on Twitch.
I might try it out because, like, I don't know. It's
do you mean like streaming games?
I would just be streaming like conversations like this. Probably there's like all different ways that people use it, but
yeah, I
always thought it was very like game related too, and I've never had like a gaming system of my own, so I just never super got into it. Like,
I don't even know how like, as in, I'm so like millennial on this. Like, I don't even know really what Twitch is. All I know is that at least it started as like a gaming streaming site.
It's pretty big. People like, you know, that's like where Hassan Piker is. He's making millions on that freaking site. Like, it's almost it's like the second. I'd say it's like almost on par with YouTube, and its popularity has rised a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway, I could go on
But
a million
I'll
things.
look at it at some point. I also have no idea what Discord is, but
Discord can be actually really great to have, but I'll tell you that off stream in a second. But thank you everyone for watching, and make sure you follow Jack and tune in. I'm going on Jack's channel next week on his podcast, so it'll be super cool.
Absolutely.
Bye,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for watching.